So the World Economic Forum kicked off this week, as ever, in the sleepy skiing town of Davos in Switzerland. Tom, one of the notable things this year is that the Labour Party is returning in a big way. They've sent some of their heaviest hitters, particularly Rachel Reeves. Mm-hmm. They're very keen to show that they're clued up with the world of business, with the elites, with the royals and various NGOs, the kind of people who attend this annual sort of jamboree. I mean, what have you made of that?
I think it's just confirmed all of our suspicions about Labour, which is that they really see their role as returning British politics to its like factory reset, which is, to use a very loaded term when you're talking about the WEF. But resets aside, the point here is the fact that, for a very long time, Davos did embody the way politics was done in the kind of post-Third Way era, this idea that political decision-making is really something which is stitched up between corporations, NGOs and the technocratic state, and occasionally the public get a look in every so often at an election. That was kind of the way in which things were decided, and everything else just got flowed from there. There's always a lot of grandstanding, there's always a lot of ridiculous talk that never really amounted to much action, a lot of virtue signalling and so on, but that was still a kind of way that they thought politics was done. And Keir Starmer has explicitly said that that's the way in which he likes to do politics. It was this time last year, I think, that he was asked by Emily Maitlis whether he preferred Westminster or Davos, and he, without hesitating, said Davos. And I think that tells you something. I mean, we all know, obviously, there's this attempt to use this as a way to signal we're not going to scare business, we're here to court private sector investment and so on. But I think the subtext to it also is the fact that they are very much of that technocratic mind, very much of a sort of way of doing politics, which we thought we'd started to move away from, or at least there had been some pretty incredible revolts against in the course of the past few years. So I think more than anything, it just demonstrates that Starmer feels like it's about bringing things back to when everything was nice and done behind closed doors in glitzy conference rooms or on nice Davos conference stages, rather than actually involving the mucky business of having to deal with ordinary people and what they think and want things to happen.
I mean, Joe, can it ever go back to normal? I mean, there's been some really interesting reporting from Davos saying that the shadow of Trump hangs over it because, he might come back at the end of 2024.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, Tom was making the point in relation to the US elections that in order to, they're going to kill democracy, in effect, in order to save it. And I think we see that exact thing playing out in Davos right now. There is so much panic about democracy, essentially. And the fact that in so many countries around the world this year, it just so happens, coincidentally, elections are going to take place. And really what you've got is elite fear of the masses absolutely on display. And there's a fear of Trump winning in the US, but also in elections all around the world, that there may be a populist uprising that might threaten their technocratic control. I mean, I'm almost loath to use the word technocratic because they're such useless technocrats. They're so incompetent. You kind of think if there was one good thing about technocracy, it would be that at least, the trains would run on time or, things might work. But we've got this incompetent elite, and essentially all they're doing is fueling panic about democracy in order to safeguard their own position. And a lot of this seems to be focusing upon panic around the rise of misinformation and disinformation. I mean, we've been there a lot before with these kind of panics. But I think one thing that's quite noticeable is that I think he's the kind of chair of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, in his opening address, he talked about the problem of mistrust. So, I mean, he's kind of realised that, people don't trust these elites. But the problem is he talks about the need to regain trust, but everything they say and do further undermines trust. And this is the whole bind I think they're in. The more they go around propagating this panic around misinformation and disinformation, essentially what they're telling people is don't trust anything that you read, don't trust anything that you see on the news, trust few things that we say, but other than that, you can't trust anything. So they're kind of talking about democracy while killing democracy, and they're talking about trust while killing trust, And I think really we need the end of the World Economic Forum, quite frankly.
Yeah, misinformation was a big theme of Ursula von der Leyen's speech. The unelected president of of the European Commission, also terrified about what the European elections might mean for democracy. I mean, it's just, it's almost, the irony is too much to bear sometimes, you know, and these people very explicitly don't care about democracy.
I think what they're aware of is that they are just completely unable to motivate anyone, or well, very, very few people, to actually go out and vote for them. One of the most pathetic articles I read this week was on Politico about the European, I think it's the European Council. I don't think they'd even approached her yet, but absolutely desperate to try and get Taylor Swift to come out and make some statement about the importance of voting in the European elections. And you say, how embarrassing and how desperate can you get to try and think that you've got no policies, no ideas, nothing that can motivate people to go out and vote for you. So all you can do is hope that someone like Taylor Swift comes along and sprinkles a bit of stardust over your election.
Tom?
I think the point about democracy is spot on, because that is really what terrifies the elites. It terrifies them when they're gathered at Davos. But also, if you think about some of the commentary over the new year, and there was a lot of looking forward to the year of elections, because, you know, almost half the world's population are going to go to the ballot box this year. It was treated as a terrifying prospect because what if they vote in politicians that we dislike? But it is just fascinating. Whereas amongst all this hand-wringing about democracy, which is really just a code word for technocracy or their way of doing politics, but amongst all this hand-wringing about democracy, it's coming from people who have no democratic legitimacy whatsoever. Ursula von der Leyen, who precisely no one ever voted for to take up a particular position. She presides over a European Union which has a parliament, but it's basically just a faux democratic window dressing for an incredibly illiberal and authoritarian and anti-democratic institution. You've got the World Economic Forum, which explicitly talks about itself as a forum in which stakeholders can get together and decisions can be made, in which policy will effectively be formed and enacted, if not properly, formally so. And yet it has zero legitimacy whatsoever. So it's an absurd spectacle, but I think it just shows you what a kind of upside down world these people operate in. What's interesting though is that they are aware of their illegitimacy in that sense. And that's positive in a strange sort of way. But the fact that they can carry on making these kind of pronouncements without any glint of irony just underlines how detached and, you know, up on high they still are, I guess.
I mean, I think the net zero obsession shows that yet again. When, you know, in Germany right now, in so many European countries, you've got this rebellion coming from farmers, from ordinary citizens against the net zero proposals, and yet still these leaders gather in Davos and kind of bang on about the importance of net zero. It just shows how completely out of touch they are.
Yeah, I think John Kerry was talking about, you know, this being the most dangerous year for climate. It obviously isn't. You know, fewer people are dying from climate-related events than have in any time in the past 100 years. You had they always invite some indigenous person on to do a little panpipe solo or something like that as a comment on the environment. And in years past, you know, Greta has been addressing the World Economic Forum. That's, you know, what grassroots activism looks like, apparently. But climate change does seem to be, and I think you've noticed this certainly since, you know, Brexit and Trump, it does seem to be the way they're trying to reassert their authority over the public, over political life.
And when Kerry says it's going to be a bad year for climate change, what it means it's going to be a bad year for climate change zealotry. Because of the fact that there are already all these revolts against these diktats. And I think the climate example is so perfect, because that's one area in which they're like, we know you don't want this, but you're going to get it anyway. And the fact that that's being pushed back against is what terrifies them so much. So yeah, it's a perfect example, I think, of how just on another planet they are.
Definitely.